Welcome back to Haunted World, where we delve into the chilling and mysterious realms of true crime. Today, we're embarking on a journey through a case that is not only filled with unexpected twists, but also reveals the darker sides of human nature. This is the story of Sharon Marshall, a tale woven with secrets, betrayal, and tragedy that feels as if it were ripped straight from the pages of a suspenseful thriller. But rest assured, every detail is rooted in reality. Our story begins in 1975, when a young girl named Suzanne Marie Savakis was just around 5 or 6 years old. She had a mother, Sandra Sandy Chipman, and 3 siblings. At the time, her mother was struggling financially and made a decision that would ultimately change all of their lives forever. She married a man named Franklin Delano Floyd. Floyd presented himself as a caring stepfather, but in reality, he was a convicted criminal with a dark and violent past. He had already spent time in prison for a string of offenses, including sexual assault, attempted kidnapping, and bank robbery. But Sandra had no idea about the true nature of the man she had just married. Shortly after their marriage, Sandra was sentenced to 30 days in jail for writing bad checks. When she was released, she returned home, only to find that her children were gone. Franklin Delano Floyd had disappeared with all of them. Sandra was later able to recover 2 of her children, who had been left in foster care. But her eldest daughter, Suzanne, was never seen by her family again. Franklin had taken her, and from that moment on, he controlled every aspect of her life. For years, Suzanne lived under different names. The most well-known alias she was forced to use was Sharon Marshall. Floyd raised her as his own daughter, moving frequently to avoid suspicion. Despite the horror she was living in, Suzanne, or Sharon as she was known, was incredibly intelligent and ambitious. She excelled in school and even won a full scholarship to Georgia Tech to study aerospace engineering. But she never got to follow her dreams. The man who had stolen her life made sure she would never escape. Instead of letting her go to college, Floyd forced her into a life of crime and exploitation. By the late 1980s, he had relocated with her to various states, making her work as an exotic dancer. He controlled her completely, making sure she could never run away. During this time, Sharon became pregnant and gave birth to a son named Michael Hughes. The identity of Michael's biological father remains uncertain, but what is known is that Franklin Delano Floyd claimed the boy as his own. In 1990, Sharon Marshall was living under yet another identity. This time, she was known as Tanya Hughes. She was married to a man named Clarence Hughes, though it is believed this marriage was arranged by Floyd to further cover his tracks. On April 30th, 1990, Tanya was found gravely injured on the side of a highway in Oklahoma City. She had been hit by a car in what initially appeared to be a tragic accident. However, the circumstances surrounding her death raised many questions. Doctors quickly realized that she had suffered severe injuries before the accident, injuries that suggested she had been beaten. Witnesses also reported seeing Franklin Delano Floyd acting suspiciously near the scene. 2 days later, Tanya Hughes, who was actually Suzanne Marie Savakis, died in the hospital. She was only in her early 20s. At her funeral, Floyd showed up with their son, Michael, but something was off. He barely seemed upset about her death. Instead, he acted controlling and aggressive, trying to prevent anyone from asking too many questions. When people from the community began looking into her past, they made a chilling discovery. Tanya Hughes, the woman everyone thought they knew, did not exist. There were no official records of her before a few years prior. The real question was, who was she? Following Sharon's death, Floyd took Michael Hughes and went on the run. Eventually, the authorities caught up with him in 1994, and Michael was placed in foster care. By this time, investigators had begun piecing together the puzzle of Sharon's true identity. But before they could get answers, Floyd did something unimaginable. In September 1994, he walked into Michael's elementary school in Oklahoma with a gun. He forced the principal into a car at gunpoint, demanding that he drive him to where Michael was being kept. Once they arrived, he took Michael and vanished. The boy was never seen again. Years later, Floyd finally confessed to what happened. He admitted to murdering Michael shortly after the kidnapping, claiming that he wouldn't have been a normal child anyway due to his upbringing. It was a heartbreaking end for the little boy who had already lost so much. During their investigation, authorities discovered that Floyd was also connected to another murder. In 1989, a woman named Cheryl Nkomeso, a co-worker of Sharon's at a strip club, had gone missing. Her skeletal remains were later found near a highway in Florida. In 1995, a crucial piece of evidence linked Floyd to her death: an old briefcase containing photographs of Cheryl being brutally beaten. The evidence was undeniable. Floyd was charged with her murder and sentenced to death. It wasn't until years later that DNA testing officially confirmed that Sharon Marshall was actually Suzanne Marie Savakis, the little girl who had been stolen decades earlier. Franklin Delano Floyd remained on death row in Florida for years until he died of natural causes in January 2023. This case is one of the most disturbing and heartbreaking true crime stories of all time. A little girl was stolen from her family, forced to live under false identities, manipulated, and abused for her entire life. Even after her death, it took decades for the truth to come to light. And what makes it even more terrifying, cases like this still happen today. If you found this story disturbing, make sure to subscribe to Haunted World for more cases like this. And remember, sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones from horror movies. They're the ones that actually happened. This case feels like suspenseful thriller but rooted in reality. 5 bodies, 5 young lives cut brutally short. A killer who didn't just murder, he played with his victims. And a college town that would never sleep soundly again. This is the story of the Gainesville Ripper. On August 24, 1990, a Friday night in Gainesville, Florida, students laughed, drank, made plans for the weekend. But in one small apartment just off campus, 2 roommates had no idea they were being watched. Sunja Larson, 18 years old, bright, ambitious, just starting her freshman year at the University of Florida. Christina Powell, 17, her best friend. They'd only lived together for a few weeks. They still had unpacked boxes in their rooms. They never saw him coming. The killer slipped in through the sliding glass door. No forced entry, no struggle, just silence. And then, the unthinkable. When police arrived the next morning, they found a scene so horrific, even seasoned detectives froze. The girls weren't just killed. They were posed, displayed, as if the killer wanted them to be seen. And the worst part? He wasn't done. 3 days later, another apartment, another pair of students. Tracy Poles, 23, Manuel Tabawada, 23, friends, just gone. The same method, the same brutality, the same staging. This wasn't just murder. This was a performance. And the audience? Everyone who dared to look. The city erupted in terror. Students fled campus. Parents demanded answers. And the police, they had nothing. No suspects, no motive, just 5 bodies, and a killer who vanished into the night. But then, a break in the case. His name was Danny Rolling, 35 years old, a drifter, a thief, a man with a lifetime of violence trailing behind him. Had been in and out of jail for years. Armed robbery, assault. But this was different. This was something darker, something inhuman. In his own words, he later described the killings as taking their souls. He didn't just want them dead. He wanted them remembered. But pride would be his downfall. When police finally caught him after a botched robbery in neighboring Ocala, they didn't know they had the Gainesville Ripper. Not at first. But the evidence, the DNA, the chilling confessions, it all pointed to one man. Danny Rolling stood trial in 1994. He showed no remorse, no fear, only satisfaction. Judge verdict: death by injection. And on October 25, 2006, the state of Florida made sure he never killed again. 5 innocent lives, a killer who walked among them, and a question that still lingers in the humid Florida air. Was Danny Rolling truly alone that summer? Or was there something, or someone else lurking in the shadows? The case is closed, but the fear remains. Sunday evening in Sarasota, Florida. 11-year-old Carly Brucia had spent the day with a friend and was on her way home, just a short walk. Nothing out of the ordinary, but someone was watching. And then it happened. A security camera at a car wash captured the last few moments of Carly's freedom. A grainy black and white image, a man in a uniform, approaching, speaking to her, reaching out. And then she was gone. This is the story of a crime that shook the nation. A case that left an indelible mark on the justice system, forcing us to ask the terrifying question: how many monsters walk among us, unnoticed? February 1st, 2004, Sarasota, Florida. It was a warm evening, a typical Florida sunset casting a golden glow over the streets. Carly Brucia, a bright and energetic 11-year-old girl, was walking home from a friend's house. The journey was short. She had done it many times before, but on this night, something felt different. Unbeknownst to Carly, someone was waiting for her, someone who had no intention of letting her make it home. Security footage from a nearby car wash would later reveal the horrifying truth. A man, dressed in what appeared to be a uniform, approached Carly as she walked past. He spoke to her, calm, authoritative. Perhaps he pretended to be a police officer, or maybe he simply demanded she follow him. Whatever he said, it worked. Carly hesitated, looked around, then, helplessly, she obeyed. The man took her arm, led her away, and they vanished into the night. What happened next was a nightmare beyond imagination. When Carly didn't come home, her family immediately knew something was wrong. Her mother, Susan Shorpen, called friends, neighbors, anyone who might have seen her daughter, but no one had. Panic set in. The police were contacted. Officers arrived quickly, knowing that every second was crucial in a missing child case. They scoured the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking questions. And then they found it, the car wash surveillance tape. What they saw on that grainy black and white screen would haunt them forever. There she was, Carly, walking alone. Then, a man, tall, stocky, wearing a uniform, stepping into the frame. He reached for her, and just like that, she was gone. The video sent shockwaves across the country. It aired on every major news channel. America watched in horror as the final moments of Carly's freedom played out on their screens. Who was this man? The FBI joined the search, working alongside local police. The pressure was on. A tip line was flooded with calls. The blurry image of the man in uniform, his face barely visible, was analyzed, enhanced, and spread across the media. And then, a name emerged: Joseph Smith, a man with a past, a criminal record filled with drug charges, violence, and failed attempts at rehabilitation. A man who should have been behind bars, but wasn't. Smith was no stranger to law enforcement. A drifter, a drug addict, his rap sheet stretched back years. But somehow, despite numerous arrests, he had always managed to slip through the cracks. When officers tracked him down, he denied everything. But the evidence was mounting. Witnesses placed him near the scene. His history of violence made him an obvious suspect. And then a chilling discovery. Carly's lifeless body was found behind a church, discarded like trash, left in the dirt. The nation's worst fears were confirmed. Carly Brucia was gone. Joseph Smith stood trial, facing the full weight of his crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. The surveillance footage, the DNA, the damning testimony. The jury deliberated. The verdict was swift. Guilty. A death sentence was handed down. But for Carly's family, there was no justice, only an unbearable emptiness where their daughter once was. Years passed. Appeals were filed. Smith remained on death row, a hollow shell of a man. And then, in 2022, fate decided his punishment. Joseph Smith died in prison, not by execution, but by illness, a fate far kinder than what he had given Carly. Carly Brucia's story is more than just a tragic headline. It's a warning, a reminder that predators walk among us, hidden in plain sight, that the justice system sometimes fails to keep them behind bars. Carly's face, frozen in that grainy surveillance footage, is an image burned into history, a haunting reminder of innocence stolen. We tell these stories not to instill fear, but to ensure that the past is never forgotten. Because the monsters, they're still out there, and they're waiting. August 13th, 2018. 34-year-old Sean Ann Watts had just returned home from a business trip late at night. She was 34, pregnant with her third child, and a mother to two little girls, Bella and Celeste. By sunrise, she was gone, and so were the children. When Shanann's friend couldn't reach her the next morning, she grew worried. No replies to texts, no calls answered. Her car was still in the garage. Her purse and phone were still in the house. Nothing was missing except Sean and her two daughters. The friend called the police. Officers arrived, checked the house, and noticed something strange. Everything looked untouched, as if the family had vanished without a trace. Within hours, Chris Watts, Shanann's husband, returned home. He told the police Sean Ann must have gone somewhere with the kids, maybe to a friend's place. He allowed the police to search his house. He cooperated. He gave interviews to the media. He looked like a worried husband, begging for his family's return. That same day, a neighbor showed police footage from his security camera. It showed Chris backing his truck into the garage around 5 a.m. He was loading something large, heavy multiple times. When police watched the video, Chris stood beside them. He folded his arms, looked nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to another. After the officers left, the neighbor quietly said, "He's not acting right. Something's off with him." The next day, investigators started digging deeper. They discovered problems in the marriage. Texts from Sean Ann showed her fear that Chris had grown distant. She felt something was wrong, and she was right. Detectives soon uncovered that Chris was having an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger. He had been lying to Sean Ann, and he had been planning a new life without her. Chris was brought in for questioning. First, he remained calm. He repeated the same story. He had no idea where they went, but when he was asked to take a polygraph test, he agreed. He failed miserably. When confronted with the results, his mask started to crack. He lowered his head. He stopped talking, and then he told the first version of his confession. He claimed Sean Ann had killed the children and that he killed her in rage. But investigators didn't buy it. Soon after, search teams found something horrifying. Near an oil field where Chris worked, they discovered Shanann's shallow grave, and nearby 2 oil tanks. Inside those tanks were the bodies of Bella and Celeste. The truth was worse than anyone imagined. Chris had strangled Sean Ann in their bed, then smothered both daughters with a blanket. He then loaded their bodies into his work truck, the same one caught on camera, and drove them to the oil site. When confronted with the evidence, Chris finally confessed. He admitted to killing them all. His reason is that he wanted to start over with his new girlfriend. He didn't want to be a father or husband anymore. No one could understand how a man could destroy his own family for something so meaningless. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences with no chance of parole. He now spends his life in prison, alone, haunted by the very faces he tried to erase. In the end, the man who pretended to be a loving father turned out to be a cold-blooded killer. And the footage of him smiling on live TV, pleading for his family's return, remains one of the most chilling lies. It was January 14th, 1995. Phone kept ringing. No one answered. Her parents were the first to worry. She never missed a call, never skipped a family gathering. The door wasn't broken. No sign of forced entry. Inside, everything was in its place. Everything, except her. They called her name. No response. And then, silence broke with a scream. There, in a bathtub half filled with water, lay Mary Catherine Edwards. Her wrists were bound behind her back with police-style handcuffs. Her lifeless eyes stared upward. There were no broken windows, no forced locks. Whoever did this, she had let them in. Mary Catherine Edwards was only 31, a beloved elementary school teacher. She lived a simple life. No enemies, no scandals, nothing that could explain such cruelty. The police began their search. Friends, neighbors, colleagues all questioned. They learned Mary had recently attended a small gathering with old school acquaintances. She had kept in touch with some classmates, people she'd known for decades. Could one of them have turned on her? The crime scene told little. There was no sign of robbery. Her jewelry was untouched. The house showed no ransacking. But there was one thing the killer hadn't hidden: DNA. Samples were taken from the bedspread, from her body, from the handcuffs. But in 1995, DNA databases were small and technology limited. The profile was there, but the match wasn't. Weeks turned into months, months into years. The file, once active and urgent, slowly sank into the shelves of the cold case archives. Yet Mary's parents never stopped asking questions, never stopped visiting her grave. For detectives, it became one of those cases that haunted them, the ones they never forget. A young woman, no motive, no suspect, only silence. As the years slipped by, life in Beaumont moved on. The world changed, new technology, new detectives, new methods. But in the evidence room, one small box remained untouched, labeled Edwards, Mary Catherine, 1995. Inside that box was the key, they just didn't know it yet. Then came the 2010s, a time when science began rewriting justice. Forensic genealogy, a technique that connected crime scene DNA to distant relatives through public DNA databases, was solving impossible mysteries across the country. And in 2019, a quiet decision changed everything. Investigators decided to revisit Mary's case. They reopened the evidence, extracted the decades-old DNA sample, and began the search again, not for a direct match, but for a family tree. Weeks later, the database returned its first hits: distant cousins, fragments of ancestry. Among hundreds of possibilities, one branch stood out. It led to a man who once lived in the same town as Mary, a man who went to the same high school. And when they pulled the old yearbook from 1982, Mary Catherine Edwards, and just a few rows away, him. But detectives didn't reveal the name, yet not even to each other. Not until they were sure. The genealogical trail continued narrowing, calculating, confirming. One after another, relatives were ruled out, until only one name remained. He had lived an ordinary life, outwardly calm, married once, worked several jobs, but his past wasn't clean. Back in the early 1980s, he had pleaded guilty to a sexual assault. The victim, a former classmate. She had been bound, violated, and left terrified. The description mirrored everything from Mary's crime scene, even the handcuffs. Detectives began quietly watching him. He was older now, graying hair, calm demeanor, a man who blended into the background. He lived far from Beaumont, but his secrets had followed him. They needed DNA, a direct link. So they waited. They followed him for days. And when he threw away a fast food cup, they collected it. In a sterile lab, the test began. Hours passed. Then, the result appeared. Match. The DNA from that cup matched the DNA found on Mary Catherine Edwards' body. Perfectly. After 26 years, they finally had him. When detectives arrived at his door, he seemed calm, even confused. He denied everything. He said he didn't know Mary, didn't know where she lived, didn't remember anything. But the evidence spoke louder than denial. The handcuffs, the assault, the DNA all told the same story. The man who once stood beside Mary as a friend, the man whose wedding she had attended as a bridesmaid, had become her executioner. His name was Clayton Bernard Foreman. In 1995, when Mary let him into her home, she likely thought she was safe, that he was just a familiar face from the past. Foreman used handcuffs, the same kind police used to restrain her. He assaulted her, then left her submerged in her own bathtub, as if to erase his crime. For years, he lived free. For years, her parents grieved, thinking justice might never come. But time has a way of unmasking monsters. In 2024, the trial began. Nearly 3 decades after Mary's death, her story returned to the courtroom. The forensic pathologist who had examined her body in 1995 reevaluated the evidence. He testified that Mary hadn't drowned, she had died of entrapment asphyxiation, suffocating while restrained. It was a deliberate act. When the jury retired to deliberate, the room was silent. They returned in less than an hour. Guilty. Justice delayed but not denied. For Mary's family, the verdict was bittersweet. The man who stole their daughter's life would finally spend the rest of his behind bars. But no sentence could return what they had lost. Her case became another beacon of how modern science, when used with persistence and compassion, can resurrect the truth even from the coldest of files. But in the end, the truth found its way through decades of dust, and justice, though late, whispered back from the grave. Because time does not silence truth. It only waits until someone listens. This was Haunted World, where the forgotten stories of the past come alive, and the dead finally speak.